George Pickens throughout the game, especially late in the game, just looked uninterested in playing football. You can't just disappear in these games or else you're not going to have impact. You can't be the guy and half-ass it. You got to look at this tape and say, hey, is this a guy we can trust?
Well, it's been about a week since Richard Sherman went off on Cowboys wide receiver George Pickens for his efforts and engagement in their loss to the Lions on Thursday Night Football. A clip that has gone viral to say the least. Pickens has been one of the best wide receivers of the 2025 season since being traded to the Cowboys from Pittsburgh earlier in the offseason. He's made some incredible plays throughout the season, incredible catches, and some incredible athletic plays like hurdling this Chiefs defender.
Oh my gosh, what a leap that was! That was insane! You're not kidding. That was insane. He's so smooth. He's so talented.
However, though, in last week's Thursday Night Football game versus the Detroit Lions, a game that had major playoff implications for both teams, Pickens had one of his worst games of the season. The wide receiver only caught 5 catches on 9 targets for 37 yards. Those 37 yards are the second lowest of the season for George Pickens, and only his Week 1 game was lower than that at 30 yards. And one of those targets in the game resulted in a costly interception off a pass that was broken out of George Pickens' hands to start the second half. This was a game that George Pickens needed to be at his best, especially with wide receiver CeeDee Lamb, his running mate, going out in the third quarter with a concussion and a head injury that bumped George Pickens up to wide receiver 1. They needed him to be at his best so that they could win the game and stay alive in the playoff race. But Pickens was not able to step up and make the plays that were needed, which led Richard Sherman post-game to question Pickens' effort, calling him uninterested and disengaged with the game and his team.
George Pickens throughout the game, especially late in the game, just looked uninterested in playing football.
So how exactly did one of the NFL's best wide receivers become one of the most hated guys within the NFL world of media and journalism right now? And that's what we're diving into in today's video. Please make sure to like and subscribe. Welcome to the KAJ Football channel, the best place where casual football fans like you and I can talk about the NFL. I'm KAJ, and let's dive into the video. To really understand the context of George Pickens and Richard Sherman, we got to go back a little bit to the 2025 offseason. All of this really began when the Pittsburgh Steelers made a big trade to acquire wide receiver DK Metcalf from the Seattle Seahawks, and then giving him a massive payday and a huge contract extension, making him one of the highest paid wide receivers in the NFL. The Steelers finally had a wide receiver 1-2 punch with DK Metcalf and George Pickens. Steelers fans have been waiting for 2 good wide receivers on their team for the first time like ever, and they're finally going to get it. They're going to get the Crashout brothers because George Pickens and DK Metcalf have been known to have just a little bit of a temper issue. There were still questions at quarterback for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Of course, though, they were awaiting on an Aaron Rodgers decision. Hindsight 2020, he ended up signing with the Steelers. But wide receivers seemed to be set for the Steelers now that they had DK Metcalf and George Pickens. The issue, though, with the Steelers trading for DK Metcalf and then giving him a massive contract is it left questions about the future of George Pickens, who is their 2022 second-round pick and was in a contract year going into the 2025 season. Despite a lack of consistency at the quarterback position throughout his first few years of his career in Pittsburgh, George Pickens still put up some pretty good numbers and pretty impressive numbers, getting over 800 receiving yards in each of his first 3 seasons and over 1,000 yards in one of them. So Pickens was due a payday. I don't know what the contract was going to look like, but trading for DK Metcalf and then extending him created some complications. Could the Steelers really trade and then pay DK Metcalf and on top of that pay George Pickens? Were they really going to pay 2 wide receivers top of the market money without really even having a quarterback because Aaron Rodgers hadn't made his decision yet? Could they really go all in at 2 wide receivers without any answer for the guy who's going to be throwing them the football? And we got our answer to that question pretty quickly.
Breaking news out of Dallas this morning. The Cowboys are acquiring wide receiver George Pickens from the Pittsburgh Steelers. That's the latest from our NFL insider Jonathan Jones. The Steelers will reportedly be receiving draft compensation, including a 3rd rounder and some other pick swaps.
George Pickens was traded to the Dallas Cowboys shortly after the NFL draft, and in return the Pittsburgh Steelers got a 3rd round pick. A pretty good move for the Cowboys, who needed a wide receiver 2 to team up alongside CeeDee Lamb and also give Dak Prescott another weapon to throw to, as he was coming off a season-ending injury from last season. Cowboys were looking for another wide receiver too to play along CeeDee Lamb and get Dak Prescott another playmaker to throw the ball to. They were going to draft Tedroa McMillan in the NFL draft if he was there at pick number 12, but the Carolina Panthers ended up taking him with the 8th overall selection. So that led to the Cowboys trading for George Pickens. And as for the Steelers and what they got in return, at the time, the 3rd round pick compensation seemed pretty decent for a guy who had only gone over 1,000 yards once, and for a guy that it doesn't seem like the Steelers thought very highly of. And as it turns out, multiple other teams around the NFL didn't view Pickens very highly either. Reports got leaked that NFL teams laughed at the Steelers over George Pickens being traded or offering him as a trade, especially for a day 2 draft selection. This report said that word leaked during the NFL draft that Pickens was available if anyone wanted him, and some teams polled by The Athletic at the time laughed at the idea, inviting Pickens into their locker room for any price considering his personality issues, let alone a 2nd day draft pick. There wasn't a lot of interest in talking with the Steelers about a trade regarding George Pickens. Mike Tomlin had mentioned multiple times that George Pickens needed to grow up, especially after this incident with Jordan Lewis, who also had some strong words for George Pickens after this game in 2024.
You know, he just got to grow up, man. It's an emotional game, man. These divisional games are big. He got a target on his back because he's George. He understands that. But he's got to grow up. He's got to grow up in a hurry.
How funny is it that George Pickens did that penalty to a Cowboys player, and then the Cowboys were like, yes, let's add that guy to our team. He left a pretty good impression, I'd say. Not only were opposing players and the head coach of the Steelers saying Pickens needed to grow up, but there have been reports that came out recently that say people within the Steelers building were calling him a child, and that he lacked maturity, and these personality issues and his attitude likely played a pretty significant part as to why the Steelers traded him away. History has shown us that the Steelers usually move off of wide receivers at the right time. Their production goes down after they get rid of guys Antonio Brown, Martavius Bryant, Chase Claypool, just a few names to list. But hindsight 2020, the Steelers 100% lost this trade.
That trading George Pickens is probably going to go down as one of the worst deals in NFL history. And I mean that. I'm sorry to the Steelers. I just think it's true. And, the best from a Dallas perspective, like what a haul. This is clearly a bad call by the Steelers.
Fast forward to the regular season, and George Pickens is having himself an all-pro caliber year in Dallas. Could it be this ability he finally has at quarterback with Dak Prescott, who's one of the better QBs in the NFL throwing him the football? Could it be the fact that he has a running mate now in CeeDee Lamb, so he's not getting double teamed? Could it be both? All of the above? That's playing a huge factor as to why Pickens is having an excellent season. Who knows? All we know is that George Pickens has been spectacular as a Dallas Cowboy. Those same concerns and issues the Steelers had with George Pickens and his personality and attitude, the Cowboys had no problems with. Those same concerns and issues the Steelers had with Pickens being immature and personality problems did not bother the Dallas Cowboys when they traded for him. They inquired, they did their research, they talked to sources and players and former coaches and all that to see if this is a guy who would fit in, and they had no problem trading for a guy who the Steelers had character concerns about. Part of this evaluation was the Cowboys reaching out to a Steelers consultant who said George Pickens would be fine in Dallas with an alpha at quarterback and a good player throwing him the football with some consistency. Dak Prescott propaganda, yes. And to this point, that analysis has been correct. With Dak Prescott throwing him the football, there really hasn't appeared to be really any issues with George Pickens in terms of character concerns or personality problems. So far this season, George Pickens has 4 games over 100 receiving yards and over 1,100 total receiving yards on 78 catches and 8 touchdowns. He's the Cowboys wide receiver 1 on the season in terms of numbers, over CeeDee Lamb to this point, which is actually pretty crazy to think about. He is 3rd in the NFL in receiving yards behind Puka Nacua and Jackson Smith-Njigba. George Pickens is also one of 4 wide receivers on the season so far with over 1,000 receiving yards as I'm recording this. So yeah, George Pickens is having an excellent season in his new home in Dallas after being traded away. And may I remind you, he's in a contract year. For the most part, the maturity and personality concerns the Steelers had for George Pickens hadn't really shown in Dallas. Or was it just the way the Cowboys were handling the situation behind the scenes is way different than the way the Steelers would have handled a situation like that? That same Steelers consultant who said Pickens would be fine in Dallas with Dak Prescott at quarterback also said Pickens was late a lot to meetings in his time in Pittsburgh, and at times it felt like he was being disrespectful to the game of football. Now, if there has been an issue with George Pickens in Dallas, it's been his ability to arrive on time. Timeliness is an issue that Brian Schottenheimer, the Cowboys head coach, has acknowledged has been an issue for George Pickens this season. He didn't really elaborate too much on that, but multiple sources and multiple reports have said Pickens has been fined for being late by the Dallas Cowboys. The difference though between the Cowboys and the Steelers, and why this isn't as much of a big deal as things felt in Pittsburgh, is the Cowboys aren't making a big deal out of Pickens being late. Whereas the Steelers might have handled that situation a lot differently. Pickens is still working hard and being accountable, and according to this report, that's all the Cowboys really view as important. Something that played a factor as to why the Cowboys felt comfortable trading for George Pickens because of these personality concerns and character issues is because of how they handled things when Des Bryant was their wide receiver, who was also labeled with a diva personality. He had emotional outbursts and reactions to games and quarterbacks, but they were offset with stellar wide receiver play and excellent football. So if there's a team who is capable of dealing with a wide receiver who is labeled as a diva, it was most certainly the Dallas Cowboys. Although the late meetings and arriving late and timeliness did add up and affect George Pickens, it all caught up to him in Week 11 in a game versus the Las Vegas Raiders when both George Pickens and CeeDee Lamb were not in on the opening drive due to missing the team bus. George Pickens was late and missed the team bus in that Week 11 game before the Raiders, and CeeDee Lamb missed curfew, and that's why he was out on the opening drive. There didn't appear to be any hard feelings or any grudges from the wide receivers to the head coach because of this decision to discipline them on the opening drive, and it looks like they both handled that pretty well, especially George Pickens, who then proceeded to have one of his best games of the season versus the Las Vegas Raiders. In postgame said that he felt that the Cowboys head coach Brian Schottenheimer has done a good job of accepting him in the NFL, and for the first time in his NFL career he felt accepted in the league. And that brings us to now, or last week versus the Detroit Lions. In a Thursday night football game versus the Detroit Lions, both teams had to win to keep their playoff hopes alive. Now, both teams could lose and still make the playoffs, but the chances and odds with the win for both sides increased significantly. So it was basically a must-win game for both sides. The Cowboys ended up losing the game 44-30 in Detroit, but the loss hasn't even really been the headline of this game. Hell, the Lions winning this game hasn't even been the headline of this game. It's what Richard Sherman said post-game, questioning the effort of wide receiver George Pickens, saying he was uninterested and disengaged the entire game.
George Pickens throughout the game, especially late in the game, just looked uninterested in playing football. And that's what you can't have. If you're going to be a superstar, if you want to be the best receiver in the National Football League, you can never be disengaged. It doesn't matter if the game's going your way or not going your way. You can't just disappear in these games or else you're not going to have impact. And just right here, cruising routes. You're the guy. CeeDee Lamb is not in this game. He's out, and you get intercepted on your slant routes, and you can't be the guy and half-ass it. I'm sorry, that's just, you can't, it's unacceptable. And if you're the Dallas Cowboys and you're looking at him and you're looking to pay him big-time receiver money, $40 million, you got to look at this tape and say, hey, is this a guy we can trust paying $40 million to show up regardless of circumstance? I don't know.
Pickens only caught 5 passes in this game for 37 yards, which is the second lowest of his season to this point. Given the year George Pickens has had, and that CeeDee Lamb went out with a concussion in the third quarter, the expectation was that George Pickens would step up and have this massive game in a game where the playoffs were essentially on the line. But things did not go that way, whether it's George Pickens' fault or not, and it surely doesn't help that one of Dak Prescott's interceptions came to start off the second half on a pass to George Pickens where it got knocked out of his hands and then got picked off. Once that Richard Sherman rant went viral on social media, George Pickens took to social media to respond to Sherman's comments, and on his Instagram story, he posted this. I'll just leave it up here and I'll just keep yapping for an extra few seconds so you can read it, or you can pause it if you like.
Don't you ever talk about me. Don't you open your mouth about the best.
Pickens shortly though took down that Instagram story, and Cowboys head coach Brian Schottenheimer did talk to George Pickens about the post on social media, which he said he's going to keep between them and keep private. He also mentioned that he did not see a lack of effort from George Pickens on film, and that the Lions did start giving him more attention when CeeDee Lamb went out of the game. Was it a great game from George Pickens? Absolutely not, and he admitted that himself, that it wasn't the best performance from him. I personally a YouTube nerd making videos in his room sitting in this chair. I don't think I saw any issues with George Pickens' effort except for one play on a deep ball down the field. Other than that, I don't necessarily have an issue with the way he played. I just think the expectation and the talent George Pickens has is so high that when a bad game occurs, people are going to be loud about it, especially guys with Richard Sherman who have a name like that. When they say something, people are gonna take notice. And that's basically what Richard Sherman had to say responding to George Pickens' Instagram post. Basically, the talent and expectation for George Pickens is just so high that when you see a lackluster game or play and stuff like that, it's very disappointing, and that's when the hot takes come in.
It's a young kid getting emotional. You know, it's our job to analyze the performance, and in that game, it's less about, you know, the comments about his play and more about the potential you believe he has. And if you think he can be the best receiver in the National Football League, and that's the expectation you have for him, when you see a performance like that, you're disappointed.
There's 4 games left in the NFL season, maybe more if the Dallas Cowboys can find a way to get into the postseason, but that's going to be pretty difficult. That's enough time for George Pickens to change this narrative that he's uninterested and disengaged with the team in the game of football. And man, would it be awesome to see Pickens get back on track to what he was doing before, because he was the talk of the town and everyone was talking about him being one of the best players in the NFL, having an all-pro season. And man, would it be great if he could just silence the media that's been talking about him nonstop over the past week, saying that these personality issues that he had with the Steelers are coming back up. If the Cowboys cannot make it to the playoffs though, their number one target and priority in the offseason should be figuring out the future of George Pickens, who is in a contract year and is someone they likely want to invest in for the future. To date, there hasn't really been any discussions on an extension. At the start of the season, the Cowboys wanted to see how George Pickens fit in with this team before doing any contract talks, and as for George Pickens, why would he want to do a contract extension when he could play himself out of some money? So he's probably earned himself a lot more money by playing this season out than he would have gotten at the start of the 2025 season. The early signs though are that the Dallas Cowboys are not afraid of franchise tagging George Pickens, and a source within the Dallas Cowboys building predicted that he's going to get a franchise tag. On multiple occasions, Cowboys owner and general manager Jerry Jones has said he wants to keep George Pickens. Dak Prescott and Brian Schottenheimer have both said that George Pickens should be a priority in the offseason, and getting him to stay is something that they should definitely focus on. And on top of that, George Pickens said he doesn't want to leave. He likes playing with Dak. He likes being teamed up with CeeDee Lamb. The numbers and financials might be a little bit tough because of what the Cowboys are currently paying to other players in the salary cap situation. But if it is something they want to get done, it surely is possible.
Don't you ever talk about me. Don't you open your mouth about the best.
Thanks for making it to the end of the video. Please make sure to like and subscribe. I appreciate your support. I'm Kash, and I'll catch you next time. Have a good one. Peace.